I'm Sonya Morton-Firth and you're tuned in to the Sonya Morton-Firth Show. Today, my guest is Kevin Whelan, economist, author, and one of UK's leading experts on pensions. Tune in as we discuss how to build wealth for the future, how you can use your pension to serve you, the one thing that you can start to do today. Stay tuned to the end where Kevin gives away some gifts to get you started on your wealth journey. Kevin, welcome to my show. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Bonnie lass. How are you?
I've just discovered it's so lovely to actually talk to a fellow Geordie. I didn't know this about you, Kevin, but we both share being born from a very special place in this world.
Well, absolutely. I know we share a love of the region, the Northeast region. I was literally up there earlier on in the week doing a networking event and a site visit. And, I always get this feeling, and I always travel by train. I don't like driving anymore because, you can use the train as a place of learning, as a place of listening to podcasts or doing some work. And I was on the train, and every time you cross and you see the Tyne Bridge coming in on the right-hand side, it's almost like marking that you're home. Do you get that feeling?
I absolutely do. In fact, the last time I was back, I was at Christmas, and I always have to stand up for that bit and just take a look down to see all the bridges down the river, and that's that sort of real feeling like, oh, I'm home. It's lovely.
I always feel that, even though I only go up, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and the accent has been, I suppose, gradually softened over years of moving increasingly south. So I left there when I was 18 and didn't really go back, and just moved further and further south, and have been in London now since 1984, right? So best part of 40 years now.
Yes.
So it's been an interesting journey. Certainly, I'm sure we'll get to that, but it's been an interesting place to know where your roots are too.
Oh, Kevin, well, lovely to speak to a fellow Geordie. And yes, let's get a little bit into your journey. But before we start, for anyone that's just tuned in, apart from hearing two fellow Geordies gabble at each other, why should they carry on and stay tuned?
Well, I'm founder of a company called WealthBuilders, and when you hear the word Wealth Builders, it does what it says on the tin. There's a real challenge that 95% of the population, that's a big number, right? 95%, it's not bigger than that, never ever become completely financially independent. Financially free, I think, is the language you use. And that to me is a tragedy when there's so much information. It's so easy now, never been easier in life to become completely financially independent, yet so few people make it. So I'm on a mission, and I have been now for many years, to try and educate not just our grown-ups, but also how to be a great money role model for children. I'm campaigning for financial literacy in schools, just to get the message that money and learning life skills, money weaves itself in the very fabric of our life, and we have to manage these skills. But more importantly, when life is so uncertain, if you look at the millennials who be listening, or just those people who can see what's going on in the world, life is so uncertain. Yet when you create wealth, you create certainty in your life. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, and why, even though I'm old and grey now and have been out of Geordie land a lot longer than you have, I'm not ever going to be put off this mission. And you and I were just chatting off air. My sort of visual ambition is to be able to infect 50,000 families with this the skills and the mindset needed to become financially independent for generations to come. And to imagine 50,000 people in St. James's Park, and then they pour out at the end of a conversation or an end of an event, and they start to infect more people. Because when people get excited about being financially free, they can't stop sharing. And I love that. So I continue to be an enthusiastic sharer. A short question, a much longer answer, but I hope it was useful.
Well, I love that. And you've also answered my other question, which was going to be, what is your mission? And for anybody those of you who don't know, St. James's Park is Newcastle's football ground, a very famous place in Newcastle. And Kevin, I absolutely love your mission. But maybe I'd just ask you to rewind a little bit.
Sure.
And I'd love to find out why you are so passionate about making people financially free.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, there needs to be a catalyst in anyone's life to move them from a place of inaction to action. And for me, that catalyst actually was born out of the early death of my father, Geordie. Used to work on the shipyards, became an oil rig worker, created a business, kind of organizing different workers to go and work on the rig. So he became an agent. I remember one day he actually showed me, I didn't understand it. It was a certificate of incorporation. He created a business, from being a welder on the shipyards to having a business, and he was very proud. And he was flashing this ISL Limited, it was called, and we didn't kind of know what it was going on. But what happened though is we moved out from a council house into a house. He then got a nicer house, and then got some cars, and then life was moving forward in a very interesting way for us. And we noticed that difference until it stopped. And it stopped because he was 46 years of age, and he died on an oil rig and collapsed on and died on there. And while that's a tragedy, of course, and nobody wants to hear a tragic story of someone dying young, the thing for me is we were genetic. He had a heart attack, okay? And we were genetic peas in a pod. We were cut from the same cloth, no doubt about it. We looked the same, we talked the same, nobody could doubt. Kevin, that's John's son. And when I started my life, I did a degree in economics, Leeds University, thought I'd be a city something, could speak French, I thought I'd be an international banker. In the end, I was unemployable. I just couldn't do the work of the structure of being told what to do. Didn't like it. And then I realized I had a big serious think, and it was August 1988. And just before I got married, which is 1989. And I said to my wife, intended wife, I don't think I can make a career out of this. And if I don't live as long as my dad did, I can't save enough money. I've done the maths. I can't do it. It's not going to be possible. And I want you to have a fantastic life. And the kids that we have, and I've got 3 grown-up kids now, I want them to have a fantastic life. I can only do this if I leave employment and build a business, but do it better than my dad. So he died without making a will. He died without a business succession plan. So basically, when he died, the business died and the family went backwards. And I saw that happening, and I thought, not for me. So I went on a quest. There was no mentor. There was no internet at the time, Sonya, there was nothing there to support a man on an ambition, a young man on an ambition then. And, but anyway, I carved a path. And if you want to know, I'll tell you how I did that, but created a pathway to build what I now call assets. And over the years, I've created my own intellectual property around this, written 3 books on the subject now, which is there are 7 and only 7 assets you can use to build wealth. And the real important thing for me is you need more than one, because too many people, even if they get the bug for building wealth, they do it in one thing, and one thing is always, always dangerous. So now I think it took me 15 years to become financially independent. And I think now I can teach it probably in 3 to 5 years. So there's so much more information now, so many sources of leverage now that weren't available to me. And that's what I'm known for. So Wealth Builders is on a mission to help people who are willing to find themselves a good reason why. My reason why was powerful and unstoppable. But for many, they don't overcome that inertia, So I don't know if you remember at school, I think it was Newton's law, which was an object at rest stays at rest.
Well, we're going back some time there, Kevin, but I can just
Well,
about
anyway,
remember.
but you need something to move it. So I just try and be as inspirational as I can. in books, in podcasts, in interviews like this. And thank you for the kind invitation to share my story. And I just want to be able to move somebody from a place of inaction to taking action. And yeah.
That's great. And I'd love to get down into the nuts and bolts of that and how you actually do that. But before we do, we talk about financial independence, and as I say, financial freedom, but it's really the same thing. How do you actually define it? Because people might be saying, well, what does it actually mean, financial independence?
Yeah. Well, I've created 5 different levels of wealth that easy to mark. The first one is financial insecurity. What that means is we've got to look at what level of income would come in if you didn't show up. So if you didn't show up for a job, or you didn't show up in your business, you just didn't show up, how much recurring income that would come automatically. And I get your distinction, and I very much agree with you that it's not passive income, it's recurring income. Nothing's passive, it always needs some management. But that recurring income, what would it be? And for most people who are successful at making a living, successful at generating income in their businesses or in their jobs, there's a high level of income, but 0 recurring. So if they stopped showing up, the money wouldn't show up. Now that's financial insecurity. The next level is security. So how much would it take to live a lockdown lifestyle? How much would it take to at least cover all your bills and the expenses so that you wouldn't live a great life, but you could live it? And for most people, that number's in their own head. So whether it's 2,000 a month, 3,000 a month, 4,000 a month, everybody lives a life on their own terms. So they choose that number themselves. That's security. And we believe you can get to security within 3 years.
Well, let's start there then, because I guess a lot of people will be listening and say, well, that's all very well said and done, but I was taught to get a good job, do my work, go to a company, get a salary.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, how do I get financially dependent from that point? Because as you've just pointed out, the minute you stop working is when your sort of the money runs out.
Well, you have to do it as you go, of course. So the whole idea is if you're in a job or in a business, is definitely don't give it up. No, you don't go cold turkey like I did in 1988. I had the fortunate position of being very young and hadn't established much yet. Didn't have I had a small mortgage, but didn't have kids, didn't have anything then. So that was easy for me. And I had the support of a partner who said, I trust in you. If you believe you can do it, I'll back you. So that's important. So having the right infrastructure is important. And usually people are together. It's just understanding that there are different points of leverage in your life that you could use, either money, intellect that you've already got, relationships you built or could build, software and systems to accelerate things and give yourself a little bit of time. So those forms of leverage, more often than not, need someone else to look inside and help you see what you're not seeing. And for the easy part is just starting to build how to get the first £100 worth of recurring income. How do you do that? Well, you can do that in any of the 7 assets. So it's just a question then of going, okay, let me understand what an asset is. Let me understand what the 7 assets are. And then let me decide which ones would, or 1 or 2, would be best suited for me. And my experience is that's not difficult if you sit with someone, but it's very difficult for people to see it on their own because, as I mentioned, it's never been easier. It's also and bizarrely, never been harder because there's a deluge of information that's out there and most people get themselves overwhelmed or confused. And therefore, a confused mind always says no and shuts down. So it needs I would call myself a financial GP, and I'm able to diagnose the financial health of anybody really, really quickly, like a CAT scan brain. And I can spot things in people and go, if you look at that, look at that, look at that, right, let's harness that and we can do that. But then encapsulated that in teachings and learning so people can do it for themselves. So it's just working through systematically, and it is a scientific process, really. It's a combination of what's the right science, matching what is in your DNA. What are you interested in? What do you like to do? What are you fascinated and interested by? And I can tell by your profile, you're fascinated by property, you're fascinated by crypto, you're fascinated, and I'm fascinated by business, right? My big fascination is business because I think it's got the highest form of leverage. It's not a market. You can add your own personal value. You can bring your own value to it. So I think there's a business in everyone. And I think wealth is about creating an entrepreneurial mentality. But you could start now by being in a job. If you imagine in a job, you just start to imagine you could be an entrepreneur inside your job. You could go to your boss. You could think about the business. I'm just doing work, doing tasks, getting caught up in the tyranny of the routine that you do. You start to see, where can I add value? Wealth flows to value. So how do you create value? See yourself on a team, like playing for Newcastle United. Put yourself on a team and be the best player in the team. Find a way to add value and say, if I could create a little bit of value by doing this, could I have a small piece of that? You could do that. And there's so many ways you could do it outside of a job or a business. If we get into that, I'll be delighted to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, just going back a bit, you mentioned the seven different assets. And just for people, we talked, you mentioned property being one of them, maybe crypto being another, your business being another. Do you have a sort of a list of the 7 asset classes?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can see behind me there's a logo, and I've written a book called The 7 Pillars of Wealth. I call each of the assets pillars. I'll come on to that in a second, and I'll make that free of charge to anybody in your listenership. Okay, so we'll create a link in the show notes, and they can have it for free.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. We'll put the link in, definitely.
No problem. Okay, so first of all, let's get to what is an asset, right? So it's a Kevin definition, not an accountant definition or an economist definition. It's something you own that is not you, so it can't be a job. It puts money into your bank account while you're asleep, and that money will continue to be paid even after your demise. So in other words, the money will carry on accruing and paid to whoever you want to, the next generation, as a legacy or a charity or a good cause. And I know you support lots of causes, all of those things. So you don't have to show up, but the money shows up. And there are only 7. Now, I put this challenge out every time I speak about this. If someone can give me number 8, I'll send them a fine case of champagne. So get your listeners challenging this and going, hey, Kevin, I think I've got number 8 for you. I haven't found that yet, and I've been doing this for a very long time.
And crypto's not included, or art?
It's not. No, they're not included, because they can be in, let me describe what they are so we don't get bogged down in a specific thing is an asset or not. It fits into a category, right? So most people who do not become financially independent, 95%, who've had the education, been told what to do, gone lockstep with everybody else through their life, they will have 3 assets that are always underperforming, and I call them latent assets. Latent as in there's a seed there, but it's not germinating for them. Those 3. Number 1 is the home capacity, the capacity of the building, the space, and the things they own inside their home. Number 1. Number 2, pensions. Everybody's got a pension in a workplace, but always underperforming, probably the most undervalued and underutilized asset of all, because people just blindly follow whatever they're told to do and accumulate things over the years like a patchwork quilt. It's just terrible value. And 3 is investing, and they tend to invest in the stock market and the stock market only, where it's a capital gain or a capital loss, and it's a roller coaster ride where there's no certainty. That's the challenge. And when you get to a life where you're hoping someday, one day, your board comes in and you get value from your pension when you're in your 60s, it's too late, when you could do it in 3 to 5 years. So how you do that is switch gears. Instead of thinking, my money's parked, the market tells me what I'm getting, how do I add value? And you add value in any one of 4 other ways I call the entrepreneurial ways, or the entrepreneurial pillars. So you've got to think like a business owner, really. So number 4, right, is a property portfolio. So not the property you live in, property that has another purpose, that yields some form of income, whether it's rent, whether it's profit if it's a care home, but it's yielding you a different form of income. Most people get nothing from their home? How much is coming into your house by living in it? Nothing. Okay, well, there are at least a dozen ways you could create value from that, but most people don't. Number 5, a business that works without you, not a business you have to work in, but a business that works without you. And there are 4 streams of recurring income you could create in a business, and most people don't create any. Number 6, intellectual property. How do you create value? How do you monetize, repurpose, dissect it, and then distribute it in so many different ways, in books, in courses, in memberships and subscriptions, that allow you to create a value from that? And then lastly, number 7 is joint ventures and collaborations. How do you harness relationships in a way that you provide something, somebody else provides something, and together you create value? And you could do that in property, in business, in intellectual property, and so on. But it's deliberately and conscientiously different because you're not doing it on your own. And so I believe that most people who don't know what an asset is will not have ever considered there are 7. And the reason why for most people cryptocurrency, for example, just because you raised it, is not an asset, is because cryptocurrency, if you talk about Bitcoin, for example, doesn't automatically put money in your life as a recurring income, has a capital value. And of course, we're going through a massive change with the halving coming up in April, May, or whenever it happens. It's expected around May. That just changes the supply-demand relationship, so the value goes up. But so does gold. You can own gold, but gold is not an asset because it doesn't have an automatic flow of income. It's a capital value, goes up or down, and it's a hedge against inflation. But they're not assets. Not in my definition, anyway.
Not in your definition. No, that's very interesting. Are you suggesting that people get or do all 7? Because that's quite a feat. I mean, out of those, I sort of look at ones that appeal to me. I mean, I've very much gone down the property route. That's how I really am financially free. I own properties, and that's where I sort of concentrate.
Yeah.
Was your suggestion?
My suggestion isn't which one, but start with one. And then start with one and look at another. So your brain is doing one, learning another, doing one, learning another, so that you're always doing something. Because often with property, as an example, in at least 20 property strategies we could wax lyrical about, and they'll all be different and they'll all suit different people. So I'm quite agnostic on what strategy, but in property, there's a lot of waiting around. You're waiting for offers, you're waiting for lawyers, you're waiting for builders, you're waiting. But while you're waiting, you're not building wealth. So look at another pillar. And often they'll combine. The biggest combination that I think I'm known for is how to turn those underperforming, often ignored and forgotten pensions and turn those into property. So we have a lot of expertise in a specialist kind of pension called a SAS, which most people haven't heard of. Small self-administered scheme is a business owner's pension. You turn your pension into a business, and now you run it like a business. And you can use it to buy property, you can use it to buy commercial property, you can use it to buy cryptocurrency, you can use it to do what you want to do. And yet most people, looking by the surprise on your face, just don't know that's even possible.
I'm going to have to take that one offline. I think I absolutely did not know that you could use cryptocurrency. So that is very interesting.
And if you think about what's bizarre there is what I find is bizarre, it's money, right? So you put money into most people in a job and in a business, they're putting money in their pension, their accountant tells them, their dad tells them, or the company tells them, but they've got these things. And that money's there.
Well,
But it's not really working.
Sorry, go on.
And I'm saying you can turn that, cross the Rubicon from pillar 2, which is the pension, and go, hey, I want to make this work in property. And you can get an income from property today. You can get the income. You don't wait till you're 65 or any of the other assets.
I think it's become so complicated, and I honestly believe I'm a bit of anti-establishment actually, but I do believe the system makes it complicated so people can't understand. I mean, I worked 17 years in the corporate life in the city, in the financial industry, and had a pension. I put away in a pension, and it's managed by fund managers, which I used to rate because I used to work for Standard and Poor's, and we used to rate funds.
Mhm.
And mine is still sitting in a pension. I can't touch it at the moment because I'm not old enough. And yet I'm just reading, having done my research on you, about SaaS. So definitely something I'm now going to look into, because I know mine's sitting with portfolio managers at the moment.
Mm.
And I know it hasn't really done much since I've come out of corporate life, which was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I bet people are listening to this, probably maybe putting a little bit of money aside into their pension and not realizing that they don't have control over that until, like you say, until you put it into a SaaS.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's for everyone. Of course it isn't. And I always caveat that. But the way it's kind of proliferated over recent years is because in order to have one, there's a special kind of place in law where if you're a business owner, so you have to have a limited company, you're allowed to set up your own company pension scheme, if you see what I mean. And by having that, you can become the trustee and the operator. So you become the managing director of your pension. So once you've got that permission, and that's just HMRC approval, not difficult, sounds hard, but it's not. It just takes a few months, like waiting around for something to happen. But once you learn what you can do, you can turn that money into real money that you don't have to wait till you're 55 or 57 or 65 or 67. You can access that money today. You can lend money to yourself, so you bridge money to yourself. You could buy commercial property and operate it. You could buy, as I said, cryptocurrency. You could buy gold. You can, and I know you interviewed somebody, Jeff from CoinPass, and we work with Jeff. So just so many ways that you can do something different, anti-establishment, and be pro you. And I'm pro me, right? I don't like being told what to do. So establishment doesn't serve me, because usually, and I think you're right, the language becomes clunky, and the people who get paid from the industry tend to suggest that, well, everybody does it this way, just set it, forget it, and wait till you're old and then get it.
I think we're taught that, aren't we, from a very early age? And look, I'm going back some, but I certainly was never taught about money at school. In fact, I was taught the best thing to do was, you got your qualifications, you got your degree, and then you went and worked, as I call them, you went and worked for the man for the rest of your life. You worked for the weekends, you worked for your 2 weeks holiday or whatever it was, and then you retired at 60. And I look back at that now, and I'm glad it is changing, because that just kept people poor, as far as I'm concerned. And I might be speaking a bit out here, but I don't think we were ever taught really what the value of money was. And in fact, we look at now, most people are living paycheck to paycheck.
Exactly.
Um, how
Um,
how do you see that, Kevin? And would you change it? And if you would, what way would you change it for the kids of our kids, the future?
yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm definitely passionate about this one. So probably, get ready for me to step on this soapbox.
Ooh.
Um, I read a book called Living a 100-Year Life. And when I became a granddad, and I've got two grandkids
You
now.
don't look old enough,
Oh,
Kevin.
don't be
You
cheeky, pet.
don't. You don't look.
Don't be cheeky. No, no, no. Anyway, look, if anybody's watching it, they'll know I am. Anyway, the point is, I was thinking about the grandchildren and thinking national statistics are showing that children born now will live to 100 on average, right? And that sounds great. We're living longer. Woohoo! Right. But how are you going to fund that life? And I started to question that, thinking, well, there's no education. There's the only option is people will work longer. And I don't want my little ones to be working till they're in their 70s, because nobody taught them anything. So along with the great people at Go Henry, we've been supporting a petition. I'd love for you, if you haven't already signed it, to sign it and even promote it, because the petition is to get money taught in schools at an age-appropriate way from primary school on. Because
Absolutely. Let's get the link on the show notes as well for that.
Yeah, because children are sponge-like, and there's been some brilliant research, Cambridge University research, you can't doubt the quality of that, which very clearly shows that financial habits begin that formation in the early years. And by 7, most children are starting to already accept and behave in certain ways by the language they pick up, the things they observe. They're so sponge-like, aren't they? So we've created a program within our Wealth Builders membership. So we have a membership program. And in the membership program, we have a specific section which is to help parents and grandparents become great money role models for their children, with so many ideas shared in a community of people passionate about this. So you don't end up being a parent that kind of drifts with that day-to-day life. You start to deliberately and conscientiously plan ways to interact with your children in all sorts of ways. And just think about the ways that money is so invisible these days. You know, what do children see with money? They don't see notes, they don't see coins, they don't see anything. Everything is in the ether somewhere. Not Ethereum, but in the ether. And it's an interesting thing, and that they tap this and they tap that, and it almost therefore begins to get into their psyche that money is literally on tap. It's crazy. So we want to do something about that, bring money lessons, money games, ways to interact with physical notes and coins, or pretend notes and coins at a very early age, and then build that different level of age appropriate education from 6 to 16 to 26. So there's just different ways to become a little bit more, I suppose, interactive, particularly if you've got children and you've got property. Take them to the property, let them see what you're doing, get them to interact, there's so many ways. I could go on for an hour just about the ways that our parents are sharing, other ways that they're learning that really brings the best out of their children.
I think it's really interesting actually, because I was brought up in Newcastle, as we mentioned, but very much to believe that money doesn't grow on trees. And, my mum had to go out and work back in the 70s, actually, when not, I was from divorced parents. So I was taught the value of money from a very early age because we didn't have any.
Yeah.
And so I guess some people are brought up with that brutal way of learning about money because they don't have money, and others do have money and don't sort of give it so much emphasis. And I'm not saying any way is right or wrong, but I do think some of the concepts that you have about money at a very early age, like you mentioned at 7, the formative years, can develop, or can sort of can make you where you get to in your future life, certainly.
Unquestionably the case. And what I don't want to come across as is someone who's obsessed about the concept of money. Money's an idea. Money is just a value, and it's a reflection of who you are. So whoever you are, that's how you'll be with money. All I want to do is really give life skills so that people can make positive decisions, because in a world where it's deliberately confusing, as you mentioned earlier on, the system. I mean, look what happens. I remember as soon as I went to university, I didn't borrow money to go to university because you didn't have to pay for university when I went. And this is not me lamenting about bygone years, but the first thing that happens when you're 18 and you get to university is the banks are on your back. you know. And if you haven't been taught that money, if you think money's on tap, you go, well, the bank's giving me free money, I'll take it. I'll have the overdraft, I'll have the credit card. And then very quickly, it's very easy, and we're seeing this, and we're seeing some other challenges too, that younger people are getting more quickly into debt than any generation before. They're falling for scams faster than any generation before. And they're pinning their hopes on social media as a way to learn when that's not the right way to learn. Because my belief, parents have got the biggest stake in the future of their children. So be the best influencer you can be. Don't leave it to chance. Because if you're not the influencer, who's influencing? And somebody is.
Absolutely, Kevin, completely agree. What are some of the main obstacles, I guess, that you hear people talk about when they talk about being financially independent? Are there some main obstacles?
Yeah, they're always are the same ones, frankly. Employed people tends to be, well, let's do both ways. Usually time. I don't have enough time. Okay. And we think you need a day a month, so 8 hours a month. If you can give 8 hours a month, you can be financially free. Can you find 8 hours a month? Well, if your reason why is big enough, you can. If you can't, you'd like to be wealthy, but you're never going to be. So there's a big difference between liking and wanting and actually doing something about that, because it doesn't happen. You have to make it happen. The second challenge I see is confusion. There's so much information, I mentioned it earlier on, that people become genuinely overwhelmed. And in many cases, when overwhelm sets in, it's like, oh, well, that's for other people. I can't do it. So they sort of doubt themselves. Bearing in mind, we're just suggesting people do a little bit with time, not a lot, not give up the job, not even threaten the job, just gradually start to build up their income. And I think the third is not realizing and appreciating that wealth is about planting seeds. It's about allowing the seeds to be nurtured and germinated, and the fruit comes later. It doesn't come straight away. And in a world where you can look on TikTok and see an influencer making millions and it looks like they've done it in 6 weeks, there's been this crazy breakdown of the relationship between gratification and needing it now, but being willing to pay the price for it. And you can't defeat nature. Nature is absolutely spot on here. The way to build wealth is to plant seeds, water them, nurture them. And we do this with children. It's the same thing. So that in the end, you've got a forest, and that forest is blooming and then giving you all the fruit you need to be financially free later on. The analogy is simple, but nonetheless, it's a principle that I think is missed out by so many people.
I think what you said there at the beginning with make sure you've got a why is so important. I mean, I talk to people and, when you say, oh, you're financially free, and so many people say, yes, I want to be financially free and I want to be free. And it's like, but do you want it enough? Because if you want it enough, you need to put, like you say, you need to put the time in, you need to put the effort in. And I see so many people that are looking for instant gratification. You mentioned Instagram, and we're constantly bombarded by images of people with a Lamborghini or, a lovely handbag, a designer handbag, a nice watch, or this or that. And all of these things to me are signs of immediate gratification. Rather than actually just saying, well, you know what, maybe this month I'm not going to spend that money in that way. I'm going to put that aside, or look at trying to make my money make money for me, rather than, as I described, too many people are trading time for money rather than looking at money making money for them.
I couldn't agree with you more. So I don't get into the idea of telling people and saying you should or you could. It's, look, there's opportunities to do it. There is a pathway to do it. There's a science behind it. You can follow a path that's well trodden, or you can try and find your own path. I suppose there's a challenge of trust as well. When you're out there and you're looking, who do you trust? And I think certainly from my perspective, I've been doing it for long enough now. Reputationally, I think I'm very comfortable with who I am and what I'm known for. Our members say good things. Trustpilot says good things. And I bumped into somebody in a networking meeting yesterday, said, he said, I've seen you, I've heard of you, and I always hear good things. And that's really, really important to me. So not saying people should gravitate towards me, but they can listen to the podcast, they can check out WealthBuilders, they can just get some free stuff to see, when does the catalyst come? When does the idea come? And you're doing great work in that regard too. So when is it right? Just get some free stuff and get in a community and start to see whether you can find some trust there, because there's no shortage of money, no shortage of people rather, who would want to help you part company with your money and then just invite you to spend even more to get even more knowledge. So it's a little bit of knowledge, then some application of that knowledge, and there's a whole process. We teach about doing that, including one step I think is missing almost every time I see when people make mistakes, is the step in a process we follow, which is called the due diligence step or the risk mitigation step, is where we ask people to sit down once they've made a decision that this is what they think they're going to do. We call it turning the wheel. When they get to point just before they turn the wheel, just before they commit the money, the time, and the energy to actually doing it, is can you write a list and share it with all of the risks that you know, you've quantified, and you've understood? Just so you've got it. And then you can see in front of you, because there's no risk-free investment, just like there's no passive investment. There are risks in every investment: risk of doing nothing, risk in cash, risk in crypto, risk in gold, risk in property. There's no asset that's risk-free. But if you understand it, then you can take the right steps. And more often than not, people will say, we save them from themselves. Because you didn't quantify that risk. That's a risk you haven't looked at, particularly if they're lending money to a third party and they haven't done the appropriate due diligence on the third party, or they haven't taken the appropriate security. So again, I'm not trying to make this more complicated. It isn't. If you get into a community, you follow a process and go slowly. You don't need to go quickly. You've got to take your time to do that. But 3 to 5 years, most people can get to security, and then 5 to 7, completely financially independent. And if you think about that, and this is a sort of language I often use, which is, for the most part, if you don't do anything, you're going to wait 40 years. Could you put some time and try and do it in 40 months and then be financially independent for the rest of your life? And then if you do that, you can leave a fantastic legacy for the next generation, because you built up knowledge, wisdom, finances, mindsets, structures and processes that can lead the next generation on a better journey than you were on, and you become the pioneer for the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So that in 150 years, I want somebody to be raising a toast to the old bugger and go, cheers, Kev, for starting it all off. Because I'm planting trees now where I'm never going to live long enough to see and get myself in the shade of that tree. I'm doing that for others, and that's important. And that's where the reason why comes in.
And I think that's the big why, like you just said, yeah, that's the big why. That's where it all comes together. Is there one single thing, if you could nail it down to one single thing that somebody could do today, just as a step forward, what would that be?
Wow. I mean, that's a really, really insightful question. I would say connect with a reason why, because in the absence of that, nothing else will happen. Find a catalyst, make a decision. Doesn't have to be death like it was for me. What was it for you? What was your catalyst? I know you didn't want to work for the man, but what was it?
I think my catalyst stemmed from my why is freedom. I'm very much somebody that wants to be free, not just in finance, but in health as well. I'm very much into my health and fitness and being free in terms of my health. So for me, it's finance or money represents freedom to me.
Okay.
And security, and I think part of that maybe being a woman as well, being financially secure on my own. I'm not reliant on anybody else, and I'm not saying that's a right or a wrong way. It's just how I was brought up, and yes, I think
I can see that, and I can see that. I'm not a psychologist, and I don't give parenting advice either. It's all about finance, but I can see that deep down inside, and you've got to pull it out. In everybody, there's a reason for whatever freedom means, and it's freedom for it to be independent, whether it's freedom of time, freedom of location, increasingly these days. For me, it was freedom of creativity. I just love being creative. I don't want to be restricted. I'm an unrestricted mind person, and I don't like to be confined, and that's important to me. So everybody's definition of freedom is different. Find it, and then find a way to move slowly to take the very first step, which is to look at those 7 things, look at the things on, the home and your pension and your investment. Could I do something a little bit better, and start looking for people who could help you do that, whether it's WealthBuilders or not, or other people. There's lots of good people out there as well. So just try and find communities and groups, because actually I'll make one final point. I think it's really important.
yes, please do.
I said to you earlier on in my story, there was no guru, there was no mentor, there was no guide, there was no internet. Now there is. There are so many ways to connect and be involved in a community, because when you do find the traditional knowledge and the traditional path that you've been shown is to do it on your own because you're in a job, you've got a structure around you, say. But when you're building wealth, there's no structure around you. You've got to create that structure. Find communities and other people who are on that journey too, because they can help you to move forward. And then you're talking the language with other people. And you start to feel, yeah, there are other people like me. And the imagination I have is, and I'll go back to the Tyne Bridge just for a moment. If you imagine you're walking across the Tyne Bridge or any bridge in your imagination, and to cross it, you've got to see the gap between where you are now and where you want to be. But in order just to leap into the abyss, if you imagine it wasn't there, that's too big a gap. The bridge is there. You're not seeing it, but it's there. And there's somebody ahead of you who's reaching out behind you, and you take the hand, and then when you move forward, you put your hand out and help somebody else. So this constant journey of being humble enough to ask for help and willing enough to give the help to people behind you is a pathway I would recommend anybody to follow.
I love that. It's almost the circle of life. Yes, I absolutely love it. Kevin, we haven't got into the spiritual side, but where can people find out more about you? You mentioned Wealth Builders.
Yeah, wealthbuilders.co.uk is the website, and that has a link to the podcast. But let's create some goodie bag benefits for your listenership. So why don't we create a landing page, say, we can make it up on the spot, can't we? wealthbuilders.co.uk /Sonya Morton Firth. Why don't we do that? And we'll put a link to the petition, a free copy of the book. You and I have had a really good time talking about SaaS. I've written a guide about SaaS. Why don't we just give some freebies away, and hopefully one of those things might act as a catalyst for someone.
Wow, Kevin, thank you so much. I love that. And we'll get that out to my audience. That is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your generosity. That is amazing. And we'll put, like you say, all the links to that landing page in the show notes. My final question, if you could go back to young Kevin, what piece of advice would you give him knowing what you know now?
Probably use caffeine shampoo, keep the hair. No, I'll tell you what it would be. And this is the genuine one, is I think I wasn't humble at the time. I think I was sort of a chest beating sort of a guy. I'm doing things on my terms. I already said I was unemployable. I hated being in a job. And I think I was less willing to be helped. I was more what I would call a DIYer. I needed to do things for me, but now I would say that was wrong. And now I'm much more open. In fact, a lot of people, and I get this one a lot, Sonya, I know you were very generous and say I didn't look very old, but most people say to me when not most, but some, they'll say, you've been doing this a long time, you're financially independent, we know that. Why are you still doing it? Right? Why are you still doing it? And I say, because now I'm very, very humble as a man. I'm on a little quest to discover more people who can help somebody else on the journey. And I call up my little ROI, which is your one relationship, that's the R, one opportunity, that's the O, or one idea from a complete transformation in your wealth. And my job is to find those people to help other people to connect with.
I love that, Kevin. Kevin, it's been a total honor. I've loved this. We've had loads of value to our audience. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
That was lovely, and thank you for the invitation. See you later, Bonnie Lass.